Hello everyone, my name is Spasmodic, and today I would like to tell you a story about what can ultimately be achieved when you persevere in the face of utter pointlessness. This story begins back in 2016 when I found myself tragically late to a party. I had recently watched a trailer for Doom 2016 and lived every moment afterwards in a constant state of hype, like I was forever walking down the tunnel before Game 7. Sadly though, my computer at the time was not powerful enough to run the game properly. Suffice it to say, the 3 pixels running at 10 frames a second left a lot to be desired. I would have went and bought a new computer, but it would be quite some time until I had the opportunity thanks to someone driving their car into my old restaurant. There were more pressing matters at the time, you see. But when the time finally came, I was fortunate enough to be able to enjoy Doom in all its splendor. The problem was, after I finished the game, I quickly discovered that when it came to the subject of unique challenges, I had fallen pretty far behind. You see, when I play games, I am drawn to the unusual. I love strange, fun, and difficult challenges. I'm not typically one for playing dozens of games just for the sake of playing them. I stick with a select few, and I explore them for years. Prime example, I am still playing the original Doom. But when it came to the 2016 reimagining, it appeared as though every avenue had already been thoroughly explored. Apart from one. No one had beaten the game without jumping before. And this was the perfect challenge for me to attempt, as I've completed a few games in this fashion before. I was the first to finish the entirety of Half-Life 2, as well as the Master Chief Collection without jumping. Recently, I added Black Mesa to that list as well. So, never pausing to consider exactly why this had never been done before, I set out on what rapidly became a nightmarish journey before ultimately emerging on the other side as the first person in the world to finish Doom 2016 without a single jump. Please, hold your applause. Fast forward now to the release of Doom Eternal. My new computer guaranteed that I was not going to miss out on this game like I had 2016. Indeed, I played Eternal almost immediately after its release, and after finishing the game for the very first time, straight away, I dreamt of being the first person to finish it without jumping. It felt only natural to go for the pair of Doom games after all. So, brimming with confidence, I loaded up the first level and walked into what is effectively the first room. Okay. It was a cold realization knowing that this was not going to be as simple as I first thought. In fact, what followed was a full year of what is perhaps the single most difficult challenge I have ever attempted. This is the story of how I went from being stuck in the first room to eventually being the first person in the world to finish Doom Eternal without jumping. I hope you enjoy. Now, for those of you who have never played Doom Eternal and are wondering what is so special about all this anyway, here are some of the obstacles you must face in this game. And about 200 more where that came from. I didn't even mention the final mission where you have to leap between skyscrapers. This project was basically like looking at this game through the lens of madness, but it wasn't completely devoid of hope. There are a fair number of encouraging tools at your disposal in this game. The first mechanic is ledge grabbing, or mantling. This makes it so you don't have to land on platforms cleanly like you would in a game like Counter-Strike, for instance. So long as you're close enough to a ledge and you can get a little lift off of the ground, the Slayer handles the rest. Next up is in-flight mobility, which is an ability that gives you more control when you are in the air. For my purposes, this means I now had the ability to curve around corners, like so. And then we have the ballista. The ballista is a very powerful weapon that has a bit of a kick to it, as you may be able to tell. You can take full advantage of this recoil by aiming the weapon behind you or at the ground to gain speed or lift, respectively. Then we have what is clearly the most obvious tool in our arsenal, the chain saw. It's, I'm just gonna let it speak for itself. Basically, as long as an enemy is positioned near a ledge, you can lunge to it with the chainsaw and clear a bit more distance if needed. And the same goes for... Glory killing is when you inflict enough damage on an enemy, they begin glowing like this. When this happens, with the touch of a button, you can carve demons into striking mosaics or turn them into turtles. Look at it, it's beautiful. Then there's the meat hook, so deliciously named because it enables you to hook onto people's meat and launch yourself to them. Don't worry about it. Now this is plainly useful for clearing large gaps, but the meat hook is important for another reason. When you latch onto an enemy, you can swing off of them and clear an impressive amount of distance, like so. Now let's look at a similar trick, but this time, let's slow down time. What you just saw is an ability called Chrono Strike. It allows you to slow down time when you're in mid-air. Now it's intended to be used in dangerous situations if you want to hit a clutch shot, but if you use it while hooked onto an enemy, you can go absolutely flying. Now you don't need Chrono Strike to do this, mind you. You can just use the weapon wheel, weirdly enough, and it's actually more effective somehow, but I didn't know that at the time, so I only ever used Chrono Strike. I'm old and too stubborn to change, I'm sorry. I could say I only used it for cinematic purposes, but I don't think lying is going to make this any better. And finally, we have dashing. Not only does it describe my current appearance, but it is the single most useful mechanic in our bag of tricks. It's an ability that allows you to zip in virtually any direction, except up or down, tragically, once or twice. This lets you stall the pull of gravity and clear a respectable amount of horizontal distance, which is plainly useful for this project, but it goes a step further. If you use it against slope surfaces, you can do things like this. It is important to note though, these weapons and upgrades are not available to you if you start the game on a fresh profile. But I knew, before I'd even started, if I didn't utilize every tool possible, this was never going to happen. So I went in fully loaded. Now, I do say all of that in retrospect, of course. When I first set out on this journey, my knowledge of the game was severely lacking. I was effectively going in blind and making it all up as I went along. Not that anything would have helped in the first room, mind you. This obstacle was insurmountable. Like, look at it. It's 15 times my height. I know, I measured. And nothing in this room helps. The walls, the zombies, the barrels, nothing. There is only one way to go, and it just wasn't happening. So I made the decision to burden my future self with this problem, carried on. I discovered that when you're actually on top of the box, all you need is a simple ballista boost, and you're off to the next section. Now I was worried for a moment that the ballista wasn't nearly as powerful as the Gauss cannon before it, but I quickly purged that thought from my brain and skipped with joy into the next area. Now, in my defense, this is actually a useful skill to cultivate. Momentarily shuffling problems off to the side is far better than getting hung up on them for ages. It really only becomes an issue when you ignore them forever, or you encounter multiple problems and can't possibly continue ignoring them all. Incidentally, this is what happened to me after exiting the first room. I couldn't figure this out at all. The area just beyond that was troublesome as well. I just couldn't fathom how to ever get enough distance or height, or both in many cases, to topple some of these obstacles. I was still very much looking at this game how it was clearly intended to be traversed, with a colossal amount of jumping baked in. It was all starting to feel a touch grim, but doubt had failed to really settle in just yet. I got the yellow key without breaking a sweat, and realized a short while later, unless I'm crazy, I'm pretty sure that rock is sinking. These successes bolstered my spirits until I reached this area and actually said out loud, "What am I doing here?" And then, eager to hammer the point home that I may have been in over my head, I came face to face with the impossible elevator. What's interesting about this elevator is that it is one of only 2 obstacles that endured to the very end of the project. It's impossible because the only way past it is to grab onto this wall, and the only way to get off the wall is to jump off of it. Did I mention that these walls are littered absolutely everywhere throughout the entire game and can rarely be avoided? Then I jumped once more towards the end of the mission, bringing the total number of jumps needed to clear Hell on Earth to 6. This was an uninspiring start to the project, to say the least. I expected the first level to be merciful for some reason, but Here I was needing 6 jumps to clear it. That is far from an ideal start, especially when the goal is to get that down to 0, and I had no clues on how to bring that number lower. But my enthusiasm remained high. Still wide-eyed and excited, I convinced myself that surely the next level would be better. Yeah, so this is the start of the mission. The rest of the level is equally as pleasant, like this lovely area, this pit, and oh, we mustn't forget about the end of the level. The next mission, Cultist Base, treated me well initially, but quickly shut me down. Then came Doom Hunter Base, and I was shut down convincingly. By this point, I had jumped dozens of times with no clear indication of how I was ever going to bring that number lower, much less all the way to 0. By the time I finished the game, I remember feeling so dejected I largely gave up and stopped counting. Piecing together some old notes I'd taken at the time, the final tally was a little over 230 jumps. This was not the glorious start that I had imagined, but despite this being a difficult silver lining to spot, all of this was still promising, in a way. To the best of my ability at the time, I did finish the game with as few jumps as possible. I now had a starting point, I had something to work off of. But more important than that, I never stopped feeling excited about the project. I was deflated, sure, but my excitement never waned. I wasn't sure if it was possible, but that didn't really matter at this stage. The journey was intriguing, and it was challenging, and in a maddening sort of way, it was kind of fun. So I hopped back on, eager to learn and improve, and my persistence quickly began to show promise. Though I should say it wasn't tenacity alone that made things feel a bit brighter. My curiosity was starting to kick in. I was starting to ask questions and test the boundaries of this game. Questions like, am I utilizing dash enough? Surely I can leverage the ballista more, right? Why am I not using the meat hook more? There is always another way, beyond what the developers intended. And I was going to find it. 170 more to go. Now, it was during this session when I discovered whispers of the meat hook's effectiveness. I used it to great effect on basically every mission. It was instrumental in bringing the Mars core down to 0 jumps, the first mission I ever completed without jumping, followed swiftly by Sentinel Prime. I also discovered how impressively effective the ballista is after entering a lift. The height that you can gain from that is kind of amazing. Now, there were some areas that continued to laugh in my face, but I found that I was starting to look at the game differently. Before, I would panic at the sight of a huge open space and default to jumping my way through it. Now, jumping wasn't a distant memory just yet, but I found myself looking at areas that used to frighten me and not immediately despairing, but instead asking a question that I believe is at the heart of all creative endeavors. You know the question. It was the title of the chapter. Now, during that session, I realized, in addition to lifts, you could also gain a surprising amount of height with the ballista after swinging off of the monkey bars ever present throughout the game. I'm sure they're called something else, but I call them monkey bars. I was also beginning to understand how useful the dash mechanic is when used against a sloped surface, an obvious looking slope anyway. It would be a while before two important aspects of this mechanic dawned on me and changed everything. But until that time, I had wandered into another interesting stage in the project. Despite still having well over 100 jumps to conquer, a picture of the more serious problem areas was starting to come into focus.
We're gonna kick the beat or what? We're gonna kick the beat? We're gonna kick the hell beat.
were the obstacles that I felt personified a brick wall in the harshest of terms, and I was on an unavoidable collision course with them. If I wanted to finish this project, all of those obstacles had to be broken. And knowing that, I had to face somewhat of a harsh reality. The lower and lower I brought the number of jumps, the harder this project was going to get, exponentially so. I was already experiencing this, I just wasn't aware of the gravity, I wasn't cognizant of it until this moment. I started at over 230 jumps. I slashed 60 jumps off of that to reach 170. Then I knocked another 30 off to reach 140. These were huge leaps, so to speak, and it felt like I was getting nowhere. To really emphasize what I mean when I say that, the problem areas I just mentioned required 95 jumps to clear, and thus, the first cloud of doubt was officially cast over this project, and it steered me towards wanting a clearly defined goal. In essence, I stopped believing that I could actually do this, but that was okay. If I was being honest with myself, this was all a bit ludicrous. I think I knew from the very beginning that this couldn't be done, but that wasn't enough of a deterrent to stop me from seeing just how low I could take this game, and maybe have a bit of fun along the way if I could manage it. My approximation of fun, anyway. I had a few ideas rattling around in my head, enough to make me confident that I could bring the game under 100 jumps with a solid push. Best case scenario, I could knock another 10 off to get to 90. That was my miracle, impossible to fathom dream number. Anything below that just felt completely unattainable, pure insanity. So, with my goal set, I set out to get the game under 100 jumps. To my immense surprise, I did even better than I had hoped, particularly with Urdak, which saw the greatest reduction in jumps from over 20 to now under 10. In total, I had brought the game down to 85 jumps, and I was very proud of this achievement, and I felt satisfied enough with my progress that I made the decision to stop. My plan was to film everything I had found up to this point and release it to the world. Maybe with more eyes devoted to the subject, this could really be cracked. It just felt so far beyond what I alone was capable of. The project was clamoring for collaboration, so I started filming what I believed would be the final montage. And that's when I found a few things.
The extraction point has been identified. I will mark its location on your HUD.
Don't be afraid.
Within minutes after asking just a couple questions and applying a smidge of imagination, I had suddenly lowered the number to below 80, surpassing a threshold that even I thought was impossible. And that made me wonder, was I giving up on this too soon? What could I really do if I poured all of my effort and focus into this one singular project? With my motivation burning bright, I went straight after the stupid box because I had had just about enough of its bullshit. Okay, so we're gonna forget that for now. The project, as it turns out, was still as overwhelming as ever, but I did have at least one idea on Exaltia. This brought Exaltia down to 2 jumps. My next stop was Cultist Base. I felt so very clever when I brought this area down to a single jump. The idea of taking it down to 0 after something like that was just unfathomable. That was, of course, until I found this. This was an encouraging and instructive moment. In the beginning, when I got here and figured out that I could get up to the top platform without jumping, from a surface glance, that looks pointless. Like, if I can't get up here in the first place, why is this useful? Because solutions to problems are usually the result of throwing enough puzzle pieces at something until a picture starts to emerge. Then, of course, I came face to face with this obstacle, and everything I just said does not apply. Why? Because this is the other obstacle that endured to the very end of the project. In fact, it's the last jump in the entire series. After that delightful area comes this section. I had discovered a faint sliver of hope in here a while back, which was dash boosting off of this slope. The idea was to curve around the wall and land on the elevator, thus skipping the entire room. The problem was this stupid fence that can only be raised by shooting the switch on the other side of the wall, and to get to the other side of the wall, you have to do all of this. A pickle indeed, if ever there was one. But then, in that moment, a beautiful little idea popped into my head. I hilariously simplified this process massively later on, as you can see, but at the time, Damn, did that make me smile. Then came the ever-pleasant floaty spinny skull area, as it's commonly referred to by serious people and professionals. When I first set out on this journey, rooms of this size, which are everywhere throughout the campaign, were very intimidating. Like, how could I possibly topple something as daunting as this? But after having spent so much time rewiring my brain trying to forget how to jump, all I could think now was, those walls sure do look awfully curvy. And finally, the climb. This room is insane. You start at the bottom, and the pillars that take you to the top are wrapped in grabby jumpy walls, and there is no way around them. The best that I could do after shooting the switch was reaching this edge, which is now effectively the very bottom of this very tall room. So this felt like as good a time as any to lose my mind. You see, banging your head against a wall is an effective method of solving your problems. That clip was taken from the original 2-Jump movie. I don't know how it works or even why it works. All I know is that it actually doesn't work on the current patch of the game, which I like to imagine means someone at id Software and Bethesda saw the 2-Jump movie back in the day and thought, he's too close, let's ruin everything. Well, try as these clandestine agents might, I have news. And with that, Cultist Base was down to a single jump. But my excitement with all this progress was short-lived because I was now staring down the barrel of a complete monster. I had entered into a terrifying stage in the project. I even gave it a name. This mission was ongoing torment. Other levels tried to keep up, especially Urdak, but Doom Hunter Base remained the Leviathan throughout the entire series. It got to the point with this mission where it became legitimately depressing loading it up. It takes a fair amount of time to get anywhere, and to do all of that work just to get somewhere that you're going to fail at anyways and not see a way through, it was difficult to get excited about it, so I largely avoided it for as long as possible. But I had to stare it down eventually, and today, I was not going to move on until I brought this level down as far as I possibly could. Lest we forget, however, here is what I would be dealing with. Thankfully, I at least knew where to start, the beginning of the mission. I couldn't quite see how I would ever get enough height to get up here, until I thought back to my time on Cultist Base, and I applied a similar thought process to this room. Those walls over there sure do look awfully curvy. Then the ever-welcoming first outdoor section. And this is when I discovered something interesting. The best I could ever manage was getting over to this floating climbing wall, the likes of which I began lovingly referring to as floaty boys. Now, it looks like I'm stranded here, but eventually, if you hold on long enough, the floaty boy falls. And when this happens, you don't hang on and shoot into the abyss with it. You hover in midair for a moment, and in that moment, your dash just so happens to completely refill. This allowed me to dash over this far ledge and skip a jump. Now, I couldn't figure out how to get up top just yet, but this was a good start. Shortly after that comes this inner area. To reach it, the developers intended for you to latch onto this wall, wait for the next one to lower, jump to it, and then jump off of it. As you might remember, I circumvented this by boosting straight onto the second wall, and because it never lowered, I could climb right off, shaving off 2 jumps. Now, there is a way through this room. I showcased it in the Doom Eternal without jumping video, but instead I'll show you my more modern approach. I prefer to skip it entirely. The next problem area was the Double Crusher area. Now, every area in this game could readily be described as barren. There are very few encouraging elements in every environment of the game, but this room in particular was especially hopeless. There's no enemies, no slopes, and the gap is way too far to cross. The geometry on the sides is invisible as well, just to add another layer of despair, but I couldn't help but think that surely I have to be missing something over there. If you're wondering, no, I don't know how this works. And if you're curious, yes, I did pee a little. Oh, and also, this. And next up was... so creatively named because I thought it looked a little bit like a donut. The best I could manage for this room was 2 jumps because, once again, nothing helps. Don't look to the sides, they can't help you. But then, something occurred to me. There was a different path through this room. And I know how this is going to sound, but all I had to do to reach it was just get high enough. And with that, I was in the red key area and into a curious stage into the DHB saga, as well as I'd encountered a shift in the project as a whole. I realized that even if I could get through this section without jumping, which I eventually managed to pull off, as you can see playing in the background, the problem was with the tiny vent in the area just beyond. The cathedrals I was so scared of in the beginning were now far and away more comforting than confined spaces. Like, sure, the large rooms are expansive, but they often give you a lot more to look at, a lot more to work with. But this jump, I could not see how I would ever get past it. Maybe what I needed to do was lean on the expansive areas and do something a bit dramatic. Maybe what I needed to do was skip the vent entirely. Now, how this game works is you don't immediately die after falling off a ledge, you kind of just teleport back to it. And because I had launched myself close enough to this area when I fell out of bounds, the respawn point that is closest by is just past the vent. All that was left after that was the impossible ending section. I punched open the vent as I had several times before, but instead of dread immediately washing over me, I just looked at that floaty boy off to the right side and said, you know, I can probably stand on that. And with that, Doom Hunter Base, the level that originally took me over 30 jumps to finish, was brought down to just 1. I sadly didn't find similar success with the Super Gore Nest or on the Ark Complex, so I skipped ahead to Terrace Nabad, which was starting to crumble under pressure. I was still stuck in the water, but Terrace Nabad was suddenly down to a single jump as well. Necroval was up next, and this mission had its fair share of head scratchers. The opening section, for example, was impossible, right up until I found this. I was extremely lucky after punching the gigantic brain that this corner exists and gave me the height I needed, otherwise I would have been in some serious trouble. Do you see what I mean about confined spaces? I then curved through this section like a majestic eagle, I punched the weird swirly skull thing, and I got to the switch, all without breaking a sweat. The terrifying death curve did elude me, but I knew it was going to before going in, so I ignored it completely and skipped to the end instead, which also continued to stop me dead in my tracks. The only boost I could find was off of this wall, which gave me enough height to reach this ledge, but not the very top. It was very, very close, but I was just always a little bit off. But then on this day, I did what any normal person would do, which was look up at that solid wall up there and think, I bet I can pass clean through that. Necroval was now down to a single jump. Then I managed something quite spectacular on Urdak. I also managed something incredible on Final Sin, with a little something extra sprinkled in.
If you cannot stop him, Earth has no hope for survival.
But after this, I had finally run out of steam. This session was completely and utterly draining. Like, I was blown away by what I had accomplished, but oh my god, there was just so much left. This was what I originally feared. The lower I brought the number, the harder this was going to get. I was here now, and the areas that I had left were absolute monsters. Now, I know I have painted a somewhat bleak picture of this game at every turn, but truly these were the apex obstacles, the hardest or most elusive in the entire game. But as daunting as they were, what I hadn't predicted when I got here was the clarity that came with them. Yes, I was staring down the impossible, but I just had to focus on these jumps now. They were all that was left. Basically, now I could finally see the end of the project, and the run I went on that night to reach the end was incredible. I started by taking one last look at Exaltia. Exaltia was brought down to 0. Then it was off to Doom Hunter base, where I combined a couple of the things I had learned. One, that floaty boys fall and then rise again like Batman, and two, I could stand on top of them for a brief period of time. And with that, Doom Hunter base had finally fallen. It was also during this session when I discovered the two crucial aspects of the dash mechanic that I had mentioned earlier. The first is that if you dash into one of those jumpy, grabby walls, again, as they're referred to by serious people, you would just latch on automatically. However, if you face them backwards, you wouldn't, and oftentimes there was a little ledge at the bottom that you could stand on that would just so happen to act a little bit like a small ramp. Realizing this, I knew exactly where to go. I went straight after the Super Gore Nest.
This facility will
Super Gore Nest was now down to 0 jumps. The second aspect of dashing was the realization that, shockingly, this game is not Super Mario Bros. I may have mixed up my game, I'm sorry. Basically, when you step off a ledge in some games, particularly in older ones, you just drop immediately. In modern games, however, like Doom Eternal, you don't instantly fall off a ledge, but instead you dip down slightly before you do, as if you're on a small slope. Essentially, you can move and work within that little space. And then, if you angle yourself towards a nearby wall, suddenly, that's something to dash off of. And with this newfound knowledge, I did something amazing. Unbelievably, I had actually finished the art complex without a single jump. Then it was off to Terrace Nabad, where I adjusted the first dashing discovery slightly. I realized that if I faced the box in the water backwards, I wouldn't grab onto it automatically, and if I would angle myself just right, Terrace Nabad was finally done. Necroval was up next, which was particularly harrowing. Like, how was I supposed to not only get all the way over here, but to then travel upwards? If ever there was an impossible obstacle, this was it. That was, however, until I thought to myself, I wonder if I could land on that thing. Necroval was at last conquered. Necroval 2 was another story, however. I had made significant strides, but there was just so much left, starting with what I dubbed the 4-jump room. So named because you need 1, 2, 3, and 4 jumps to clear it. I should have told you to brace yourself properly for my level of creativity, I apologize. Now, I did find a slope towards the bottom of the room, but it wasn't exactly intuitive going farther down looking for a solution. Felt like I was back on Cultist base again. But then, something amazing happened. With the 4-jump room cleared, it was now off to the impossible gap. This was a nightmare area, the perfect blend of a wide open space and a confined area. There was quite literally a vortex at my feet. Insanely, however, the developers did leave me with a little something to work with. After that, I only needed to clear this giant elevator, which did take a bit more than a smile, but, well, I'll just let you see for yourself. Necroval 2 was finished. Urdak was next on the list, blessing me not only with this little section, but with the vent in the sky. Thankfully, however, this time around, I was up to the task. Now, anyone familiar with Doom Eternal would not have believed me if I said I cleared Doom Hunter Base without a single jump, much less Urdak, but it was done. And after Urdak, I found myself in yet another interesting stage in the project. And this stage was used as a lightning rod to torment everyone possible with repeated updates as to the supposed impossibility of this project. I remember saying to friends, 15 is the best I can do. No way it's going to get any lower. Also, it's 13 now. Just kidding, it's 9, but 7. 7 is the best I can do. I am not kidding this time. Okay, now it has to be over. Like, look at this area on Final Sin. I can't do this. There's nothing here.
He's close. Cross that bridge.
And with that, Final Sin was brought down to 0 jumps. This was completely insane, but for my money, nothing compares to what happened next. I figured out if you punch the box from an angle, despite the initial punch being registered, the Slayer still lunges at that spot, and with that momentum, and paired with our old friend in-flight mobility, the box was finally toppled, and with it, Doom Eternal was all the way down to just 2 jumps. Now, despite everything I had learned and accomplished, there was nothing I could see that would help me pass the impossible elevator or the impossible switch. I looked over every inch of that elevator and I just couldn't find anything. Nothing seemed to work. And I'm not even going to talk about the switch. So pestering my loved ones ceased. 2 jumps was the official final number. And with that, I decided to release the Doom Eternal in 2 Jumps movie. I cannot begin to describe how proud I was of this achievement. I was so happy. It was just so unbelievably mind-boggling that I had done that. I had started at over 230 jumps and brought that number all the way down to a sparse 2. And that's where the project sat for months, dormant, until one day, I played through these lovely campaigns when they both became available, and I'll bet you can't guess what crossed my deranged mind shortly after.
Get that side check, put it in pockets till I get back. Going downtown, see a man, and I ain't got time to shake your head. Get that side check, put it in pockets till I get back. Time and time waits for no man, and I ain't got time to shake your head. Get that side check, put it in pockets till I get back. Going downtown.
Do feel free to watch the videos I made on these expansions, links in the description. God, that sounded horribly YouTubey. Now, I would tell a more comprehensive story of the trials and tribulations I faced finishing the expansions if I could, but there's honestly not much of a story. I just kind of did them. It was brutal and unforgiving, make no mistake. The prospect of clearing some of these obstacles was completely absurd. This building, for instance, wasn't encouraging or inviting at all. In the end, I figured everything out with surprisingly little struggle and resistance, all things considered. Afterwards, obviously, I started editing the videos together, and then something bold happened during the edit of the second movie. Frankly, something misleading happened. I decided to include this. Now, I don't know how you're reading that, but to me, this heavily implies that I finished the main Eternal campaign without jumping. This was, of course, not true. In fact, it was precisely 2 jumps away from being true. But for some reason, it just felt right to say. It felt clean, it felt neat, certainly less arduous than saying, the finale of when I tried to finish Doom Eternal without jumping, but I'm currently 2 jumps short Lamau. I wasn't sure if the main campaign was possible. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to go back, but I had given myself that push, so I decided to hop back on and just kind of take a look around. It wasn't long before I was ascending on the impossible elevator, and what happened then is something I still laugh and cry about to this day. I was wading through a cocktail of emotions in this moment. I felt resentment towards my hasty past self. I just did this exact trick on several other missions. Why didn't I figure this out? This was so obvious, it brought me physical pain. I felt a modicum of embarrassment creep into my soul, but mainly after the surprise wore off, I just felt happy. Hell on Earth was finally done. And that meant only one jump was in the way of me actually finishing the entirety of Doom Eternal without jumping. The problem was, the last jump was this. Now, I know that this jump does not look like much, but it's unbreakable. I am saying this as present-day Spasmodic, who can now beat this game without jumping effortlessly. And I don't say that to brag. Well, maybe a little. I tried everything I possibly could in this area, and I came up short each time. Like, throughout this project, I learned that it didn't do me much good to declare things impossible. I wasn't being honest or realistic when I said that. I was just imposing this mental roadblock on myself for no reason. But for this jump, it's true. And it's difficult for me to express just how uncomfortable that is to say and how vaguely annoying it is to say. Like, all these years later, I still feel that pull towards belief. Even now, as I'm recording this, I'm doubting myself. Can I really say that this jump is impossible? Can I say something that definitive with absolute confidence? I genuinely want to stop this recording right now and go look again. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I need fresh eyes on it, but there's nothing there. I tried going through the wall, I tried leading an enemy in there, going through other walls, dashing off every wall, pressing the switch from afar, dying on the wall. Nothing worked. So I decided to look to the sky. I'm not kidding, I'm actually far outside the Citadel too, on the other side of a gorge, staring up at a mountain no less. There was a glitch I was aware of, even during the edit of the 2-jump movie, but it felt like it was too difficult to pour any meaningful amount of time into. It was a method of getting out of bounds, but as far as I could tell, I needed to jump in order to do it, which astute listeners will note is the opposite of useful in this case. But with only one jump left, it was the only option I had left. The first step was actually getting out of bounds. You start by getting up here, which is even farther away from the Citadel, of course. It's actually closer to the beginning of the mission. The trick then was to carefully dip down off this ledge to create a small ramp and launch myself out of bounds. Once out of bounds, I had to navigate a series of invisible walls, as one does, which brought me all the way over here. From here, I had to jump over an invisible gap onto another invisible wall, and at this point, I could get on top of this crane. This is where it gets bad. Once here, the goal is to cross the canyon. The problem is that you have to get over this enormous invisible wall here. Now, it's easy if you can jump, but without jumping, I was left completely stranded. This was as far as I had gotten in the past, which is why I dismissed this glitch before. But as chance would have it, on this attempt, I just so happened to find something. Suddenly, I was on the mountainside, which was ridiculous, but I was only part of the way there. I still had to reach the Citadel. If I could, all I would have to do is follow this path, drop down on top of the map, waltz on over here, and teleport back inside the map, skipping the switch entirely. Now, despite being on what is essentially a gigantic slope, it was surprisingly hard to find an adequate slope to dash off of. I eventually found one, it seemed to occasionally give me height, and that would have to do. Scouting ahead with jumping, I knew all I had to do was reach this ledge, and it would all be over. And then it happened. I did it. I had just become the first person in the world to finish all of Doom Eternal without jumping. After a full year, after all the twists and turns and despair, it was done. And as I looked out over the canyon, something kind of funny happened to me. I was happy, although in a state of shock and disbelief, but I didn't have the explosive reaction to this accomplishment that I had initially imagined I would. The excitement, it seems, was mostly in the journey, and now it was over. Suddenly I found myself sitting there going, well, I guess that's over. It was a bit melancholy, like I was alone when it happened. Like, gaming is oftentimes a solitary activity, historically reserved for those of us that prefer isolation, but more so than usual, Truly, no one was watching, much less cheering me on. I had simply finished the puzzle, and now I had to put it away. And through that, I couldn't help but wonder what the point of all this was. Why did I do this? But instead of succumbing to the swirling oblivion of doubt and self-loathing that we are all powerless to, I reminded myself that I was allowed to experience joy in this moment and savor it in earnest in my own way. Sometimes the best way to enjoy something is in silence, like how fitting after a year of fighting, I now had the privilege to sit in peace and reflect on everything. It has taken me a long time to learn this, but your achievements are not defined or marred by your reaction to them, or lack thereof. This achievement wasn't pointless, it was amazing. Like, I ventured out into the unknown with zero knowledge of this game, and attempted the most absurd and difficult thing I have ever attempted. And I emerged on the other side, victorious. I was willing to go on that adventure, not knowing how it was going to end, and suddenly, without much interference from me, it just kind of happened. I say all this because I believe that people get in the way of themselves more often than they realize. They worry if they're good enough almost constantly. They instinctively look at everyone else and make themselves small. I'll never be as good as that person. I'll never be as smart. I can never learn how to do that. I hear these things all the time. I certainly felt that way at multiple points throughout this project. I felt like an interloper in my own designs. But I did it. And I know this ending might seem a touch dramatic for you, but it felt wrong to end this story purely on a note of success. I will often watch stories like this, and they almost always end with, and then I got the world record, and everything was great, and I have perfectly coiffed hair, and I kiss all the ladies, and look at how history will remember how perfect I am for all time. And perhaps that is how other people feel, and more power to them. I'm delighted for them, but that's not what I felt like when I reached the end of this project. And it's not lost on me that I am talking about a game here. In fact, that is precisely my point. I did this knowing I couldn't apply it elsewhere in life. I did this without any hope of reward. I did it for its own sake, and I doubted myself almost the entire time, all the way to the end. But I pushed through, and not even out of an unshakable inner faith in myself. It wasn't steely-eyed determination guiding me. I don't know what it was, frankly. Conceivably, I did all this for no reason, basically because it was just kind of there, and it seemed a little bit fun. You don't need much of a reason beyond that to do anything, in my opinion. Sense is not something we're given, it's something we make for ourselves, and if you approach anything with enough authenticity and enthusiasm, you can end up surprising yourself. It's been my experience that everything is generally a lot more fun if you really lean into the pointlessness of it all. There is success to be found in all things, no matter how small. No matter how hard something is, no matter how demeaning things can feel sometimes, the trick is not to be perfect or get everything right on the first try, or the 10th, or the 100th, or the 1000th. You flounder in the dark, you take pride in your aimlessness, believe and know that you have something to offer, and you just fail better each time. Until one day, you may just surprise yourself. Please be open to the possibility that you are the right person for the job, whatever it is you want to do. And I think you'll be happier for the trouble. And that is how I finished Doom Eternal without a single jump. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I very much appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. I love this story, and I'm happy to see it finally being told. And as for the next installment in the series, Doom: The Dark Ages, well, I guess we'll see what happens. Thank you again, everyone, and take care.